the planets have aligned, and once again, the prophecy has come true. That's right, folks. It's time for another episode of the Roundtable Rethink podcast with me, your host, Uncle Paddy, joined every week by twin brother in spare parts bin, Andy, the asshole.
Woo!
And
Come on now.
We don't like to do any of this without the philosopher king himself, Stevie Telvaivie.
Good evening, gentlemen, but you may have to in coming weeks.
Okay, so this week we will be discussing the deleterious Black Mirror effects of AI in society. We'll be talking Cold War, AI war. What are the lessons to be learned? And then finally, we'll unpack Google's I.O. conference and all the incredible new products and AI tools and models that were unveiled.
Did you
there.
put an extra shot of coffee in that glass? Because seem to have more vim and pep than you do normally today.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a compliment in there somewhere.
It was just the whole...
It's time! So here we are, episode 18 of the Roundtable Rethink podcast.
18? Bloody hell.
Getting there.
Before we get into the docket, tell us about the week, and Stephen, maybe tell us about the weeks coming up.
So two things. I think the week that's been, best thing of this week was our Harper McLeod IT conference.
Yes.
Where you were kind enough to scare the shit out of a bunch of lawyers. Both about the future of AI, but also my favourite bit was when you were starting to explain to them how drones were going to come along and kill them all.
I never heard that bit.
No, we were discussing that every single industry and organisation has been caught flat-footed, including education, including government, even things like warfare. Future wars will be number of drones multiplied by the kill rate. It's like, you ever seen that Bobby Lee podcast?
Good night.
And he talks about his dad. His dad, Bobby Lee's a Korean comedian. He's got a really popular podcast that he does with Andrew Santino. And his all Korean dad used to come in and tell him stories, and he'd go, you know what Japanese used to do to us? They used to get big pot of boiling water, and they turn us upside down and they dunk us in boiling water, and our skin would fall off and we'd be like, ah! And then he would leave the story there and he'd go, good night.
Yeah,
So I was Bobby Lee's dad, but to the lawyers. I was like, you're all going to die. Good night.
The podcast version of Bobby Lee's
That kind of
Papa.
sums it up. That kind of sums up. So that was great. A really great conference. Thoroughly enjoyed our interactions. And I am heading off on my other career of tour guide over the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to be off to Ireland's sunny shores. I am going to be bouncing about the north of Scotland. So I will be in and out the pod for the next few weeks. So
As we all will to an extent. So I've got a busy June as well. I'm off on a cruise first week in June. I'm only back for 10 days and then I'm off to Poland for 4 or 5 days with my family. So June's a pretty busy month for us, but we're going to make it work as best we can, right?
There might be 1 or 2 weeks where
We've got a few stunt doubles to
interrupted.
Parachute in.
But we'll try and keep it as consistent as we can. We'll try and bring you the podcast that no one was asking for
why not just
as much as we can through the month of June.
why not just take episode 3 or 4 and just remarket
Replay it again.
Call it 19 and post it.
Although, can you imagine how out of date that episode is now? It would actually be mortifying to go back and listen to the commentary on that. It's so horribly out of date, it's a joke.
Totally.
Anything that we were talking about then is probably completely irrelevant at this point, particularly as it pertains to AI.
Sounds like most of my life.
In a kind of related note, I've been talking to a couple of companies today that I've got consulting arrangements with, and they're big companies. And a lot of them have spent the last kind of 12, 24 months going through these long, laborious strategy sessions as it relates to AI, only to get to the end of the exercise to realise that all the assumptions the strategy was based on that took them 12 months to come up with is now completely invalidated.
Yep.
Because the landscape has totally changed again.
Good night.
So, another good night moment. So this stuff is just moving at breathtaking speed. We thought Gemini 2.5 Pro and Codex last week that we talked about. And then, of course, this week we've got freaking Claude 4, and that seems to be the new state of the art as it relates to code gen. So, you almost can't keep up with it. It's a full-time job trying to just keep up with the news.
I think that's the thing I've also realised, even just in my own life. Actually, I rely on you to tell me what's happening.
To do the hard work so you can then fucking repeat it to everybody.
Absolutely. But even keeping up with what's available, having time to go on, no one other than the wealthy unemployed.
Or the artistically obsessed.
Or both. Kind of actually has got the time at the moment
for sure.
to keep on top of everything. It's just too much stuff. And you got to pick your applications and try and get good at something rather than just wandering around a circle, which I think is what we kind of discussed during the week, that too many people are wandering around and not doing anything rather than finding something and working the muscle.
Correct. All right, let's get into the docket. We're going to switch the order up this week. Andy the asshole is going to kick us off. So Andy, what are we talking about this week?
So very uncharacteristically for Andy the asshole, I thought I could steal Stephen's mantle for a week and lead us into a kind of freewheeling philosophical chat about some of the potential deleterious coming effects of AI. Now, I don't want to create a dystopic Black Mirror episode. We're not all going to be in pelotons in the factory powering the communal power station. But the truth is, for the longest time, I have had a lot of concerns about what AI means for society. And the reason that I think it's timely this week is because I would say up until now, although I've voiced these concerns in the past, they've always felt quite, although they felt real, they felt also quite abstract at the time in terms of where AI was at that particular moment. But I have seen enough in terms of announcements and breakthroughs in the last few weeks where it's got me thinking again that these concerns are no longer abstract. They may actually be, we're certainly on the cusp, we're rounding the corner and moving on to the steepest part of the hockey stick. And that's got me worried that a lot of these concerns that I've had are actually imminent and just coming over the horizon into plain view just now.
So what are the concerns? There's the obvious stuff like job displacement, but what are the other ones?
There's three areas in particular that I want to kind of lead us into a discussion on today. The first one is, I do think there's a crisis amongst young people, like kind of loneliness and disconnection.
Yeah.
So that's one area that I want to lead us into a chat on. Secondly, just before we kind of go into each of them individually, I want to talk about jobs. And again, I don't just want to make this a doom fest. I want to talk about jobs. I want to spell out in a wee bit more detail what I think the challenge is, but I also want to lead with some positive commentary as well. And most importantly, give people some actionable steps that they can take at the end of it, which can help them not just survive, but thrive in this terrible era of change. And the last wee thing that I want to touch on is we've always been told that life is about the journey, not the destination. But AI is all about obviating the journey and getting you straight to the answer, straight to the output, straight to the destination. And I do think there's a potential, particularly for young people, to lose a lot of the learnings and growth and skills development and personal development in that process. So that's the three areas that I'd like to touch on. So I think we can just make a start by maybe starting off with the point that I just made there, specifically about career. So, and in particular, the value of earned experience, right? So, like I say, we talk about life's about the destination, not the journey, but AI is absolutely about getting you straight to the answer. So, what happens when we stop valuing the climb? That's a real problem, right? I think it's objectively true that the three of us are wiser, sharper, and more capable, not because a business exists with your name on it or my name on it, but because you built it for the ground up, brick by brick, fuck up by fuck up. And I worry now that we're potentially taking that experience away from kids and taking them straight to the outcome.
I tend to disagree. I think that knowledge without experience is worthless. So effectively, all that we're creating for those, it's the old adage, that which is easy is seldomly good, and that which is good is seldomly easy. I think those that go straight to the knowledge and try to use the knowledge with no experience are going to get little or nothing out of it. You're going to see them very quickly because you need to be able to contextualize. So what we're seeing is the creation of a fabulous tool which will make part of the process easier what we're seeing already is a lot of the fuck ups of people that want to go. You see it with the court cases, people going into court and quoting cases that don't exist. That's just stupidity. That is someone.
But that's the problem, isn't it? You've just highlighted the problem there, which is, so at the start, let's say for the start of your business journey, you had the vision, but the vision was beyond your capability. And that gap was where all the growth happened. It's where you learned how to think critically. It's where you learned how to be resourceful. It's where you learned how to think properly and how to solve problems.
I don't think that's changing, though. I think that the knowledge is still there. So we've already seen that. I think the example I gave is the perfect one. If you go in and try and just use produced knowledge without a context or without verifying, you're always going to have a problem. And it's no different from just walking to court and making something up or into any situation. So I think what you've got is, if you are lazy and take the easy option, as has always existed, things will not work out well for you. AI gives you a tool which, if you work at the AI, work at the experience, work at verifying, so it points you in the right direction. Go and check the things it's pointing you at, because with all the deep searches, you can see what it's looked at, where it's got information from. It's not a replacement for all of us.
Yeah.
It is a tool to be used, and if you don't understand it as such, that's where the danger, I think, lies.
I was going to come at it from a different angle. So, where my mind immediately went was, well, when I was a young salesperson at 21 years old in my Renault Megane company car coming up and down the country with a boot full of A to Zs, and then sat-nav came along. I never felt it was an incredible new tool that meant I didn't have to pull in at the side of the M6 and pull at the city centre of Manchester map. It could take me right there. But by transitioning from using A to Zs to sat-nav, that took all the work in Andy might call that growth or development out of understanding geographical parts of the country. I never felt like I lost out on anything. I still have a good geographical understanding of my environment. I still know where I'm going. I still roughly know where things are. Yeah, I just sat-nav just makes it much easier, right?
But that's because you did the pre-work. What if you only had sat-nav and you never knew how to interpret maps or anything like that? The point I'm trying to make is...
Could you not say the same thing when Google search came along? I mean, like, before we had Google search and you had Yellow Pages and you were trying to find information, it was hard, right? You had to go to the freaking library and read books, or you had to go to the Yellow Pages and find out who the vendors were, or Thompson Local, who was in your area. And then Google came along and just abstracted all that away into a search bar.
Even more simplistically than that, I am amazed how innumerate this generation is. And they don't count. They don't need to count anymore.
Yeah.
There's lots of mechanisms. Doesn't make them incapable. It maybe is a skill set that they could work on for very specific things. But the reality of it is, they don't need to count. All of the tools are around them.
But how much more of that will AI take away? So, for example, that's actually a really good point, right? You used to be able to recall people's telephone numbers. Now nobody has the ability. I couldn't tell you Paddy's telephone number, and I speak to him 3 times a day. If you held a gun to my head,
say call.
Yeah, exactly, exactly right. So you go straight to the output. Nobody can do mental arithmetic anymore because, again, calculators just shut that part of us off that forced us to be able to do the mental gymnastics for arithmetic. And now we're getting to that stage where things like spelling and grammar, where through tools like Grammarly and AI and stuff, people are actually losing the ability to write.
But I can't plough a field anymore.
Yeah.
I can't make a pencil anymore. I don't know how to weave anymore.
Yeah.
But the reality is, how important
Are
is
we
that?
just leaving these huge gaps in our skill set that are going to leave us vulnerable to basically being able to execute on opportunity?
Ourselves. So the climb is not going to be, can you recall every street in Manchester without a sat-nav? The new version of the climb is...
Well, that's a good way to pivot. In the new version of the climb, yeah.
So the climb is just going to get reframed. Instead of doing the hard work of learning fairly mundane things, technology abstracted that away and gave you the mental capacity to work on higher value problems.
I actually think, and again, I did
just to finish that thought, right? So if you went to the local pub, picked the biggest loser out of the fucking pub and sat them in front of an AI tool, it would be as incongruous to them. It's not like just because they have access to it, all of a sudden they could solve every problem in their life and they wouldn't have to think. They could almost do nothing with it because there is a learning curve to these AI tools, and there's a serious learning curve to make them truly practical and useful. I actually think that will get worse over time. I think the more sophisticated the tools come, the new climb will be, there'll be an endless depth to prompt engineering to generate outcomes, and that a lot of the climb will be in that learning curve rather than learning mundane skill sets.
So what are these skills that we need to retain then as human beings?
An experience I had today, and I see this a lot when I'm talking to students, I think that one of the massive skill sets that's going to become important to us, it's going to be creativity again.
Yeah.
We've lost the ability to be creative. So suddenly it's not about the information, it's about being creative with the information. How do I use this information? How do I find the opportunities, the gaps? And I think that will be the skill set. When you've got a level playing field for data, it's how you then use that data, the creativity of people's minds. I see it
as the human skills in it. It's
education's going to take 20 fucking years to catch up to this anyhow, so nobody's going to have to do anything different anytime soon from a learning core skills point of view, because there's no way education can catch up with this.
But I think the takeaway for young people in this perspective is if AI is going to dominate productivity in the professional space in the future, I think it's more important than ever to be able to hold on to the human skills, active listening, critical thinking, building rapport.
So again, let's go back to last week and use our airline pilot analogy. So we discussed that the pilot only flies a tiny part of the flight, hand flies the flight, 10 minutes on the takeoff, 10 minutes of the landing, automated systems fly the rest of it. Pilot can go a 40-year career without having a serious incident, which means that for most of his 40-year career or her 40-year career, the plane has largely flown itself. But the pilot never loses the skills because we send them away to be trained every 2 months. We put them through exams. We make them demonstrate they've still got the skills because the skills are a backup mechanism for the AI and the automated systems. Maybe that's what the future of these retained skills looks like. Maybe it's skills we know we almost never have to call on, but we go and train on them and we go and sharpen them up anyway.
Yeah. And I think that there's an interesting deflection point as well, because I think when I use a calculator, I don't have to think about a calculator. I know that it works.
Yeah.
AI has not yet got to the stage where I know that it works. I need to have sufficient knowledge in my own head to verify. There will come a deflection point where that verification becomes less and less important. I don't need to know arithmetic anymore. The calculator does it. We will reach a point, I am sure, where AI, for most things, will give you the answer and it will just be there.
Yeah. Suppose it had me concerned about in a world where you can just get to the answer, where is the incentive structure to engage critical thinking and learn critical thinking? Now, I know that the long tail answer is in getting productively employed by somebody to do anything, but if the answer is just there for everything, like I was talking to a school teacher.
Getting to an answer is different to all the things that are important for us in society, like achievement and self-worth. You know, like you'll still have to achieve things in the future with or without AI, and you'll still have to go and find self-worth. Just because the answer becomes instantly available to you, I don't think we'll change that dynamic.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What's the answer to life? 47. So the answer is irrelevant. It's actually understanding the question, putting context, understanding human emotion, understanding, as you say, the human interaction. So I actually think it's probably a problem that doesn't exist. I think that some of the other societal ones you talk about are much more problematic.
Very good. Okay. Well, we'll move on for that one then. Yeah. So remember, kids, don't cut any corners. Do the work. Learn the foundational skills that will make your AI activities even more profound. And don't cut any corners. We don't want a generation of dum-dums following us.
You don't want to become just a prompt monkey.
Yeah.
And that's all you are. You're just a really, really good prompt monkey. But if we take the tools away and we start talking to you, you actually don't know shit. You just really know prompting.
Yeah. Be creative.
I don't think I'm not saying that in 15 years' time there's some Black Mirror version of this where that could well be true, but I think in the short-term future we're
good to know that my concerns on that front may be unfounded. So the next thing that's been bothering me a wee bit is, again, we've all got children, we've all got young people in our lives, and I do just have this terrible concern that, you know, this kind of epidemic amongst young people of loneliness and disconnection which I think started with the internet, was definitely exacerbated horribly by social media and can now be exacerbated further by AI. So how do we make sure that our young kids don't get left behind by all of this, but while still, it's really a kind of rallying cry to parents, isn't it? While still staying connected, still trying to build real relationships. Because one of the challenges we've got just now is there's been digital substitutions for real life, right? Porn instead of partners, right? A generation learning about intimacy from screens instead of physical interactions, right? Social media instead of real connections, gaming over gathering, their entire social lives now taking place through avatars and usernames and not in in-person interactions. Yep. So,
So shout out to John Douglas. John, great to see you during the week. But as he said, I think I did go on a bit about this last week, and he went, you try bringing up kids without an iPad. So it's a really difficult balance. Parents are not lazy. Parents are good people. They're trying to do the best for kids. But looking after kids on a full-time basis is exhausting.
Yeah.
So where is the middle ground? Where can you get some respite by giving them appropriate levels of time? And again, that which is good is seldomly easy. That which is easy is seldomly good. Where's the balance? How do you build in some socialization? How do you make sure that your kids get equal gaming time and gathering time? So I think it's maybe, again, it's an evolution. It's a finding the middle ground. I don't think you're ever going to be able to protect them from that.
But I think you're assuming that we're all doing a great job of that, but everybody that I speak to that deals with kids at scale, particularly teachers, are telling me the complete opposite. They're telling me that they're locked in fucking nut jobs, sitting in classes on their phones, and when they're actually forced into group activities, it's like us back in primary 7 when you did social dancing and the boys had to stand over there and the girls, they're standing staring at each other with their eyes sticking at their head in blind panic about what to say to each other.
Because they might have to interact.
Because they might have to interact with each other.
A telephone or a text message.
So that was the politically correct answer, but I'm not sure it's actually playing out societally.
Well, it's not playing out societally, but I think that's not the kids' fault. Sorry, John, it's the parents' fault.
Yeah. Exactly. Not John, but just generally speaking.
But that is the point. It's
one obvious thing is you have to take the phones out of the schools. Totally. I mean, you cannot give somebody a device that's got unlimited content, unlimited information, unlimited entertainment, and then some boring fucking completely disillusioned fucking 63-year-old history teacher wants them to put that down for a while and talk about the French Revolution.
Well again, think about what you're training your kids to do. We all understand the
with all due deference and respect to 63-year-old history teachers. I didn't mean to really pick on you guys. I'm sure there's loads of other examples.
Think about the response. Our kids get an endorphin hit, it addicts them to doing something. Yeah. So all we're doing is saying that's where you're getting all your endorphin hits from. Bing, 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 off your phones, off your computers, off your AI. And it does come back down to parents and your local community. How do you get your kids get an endorphin hit from playing football in the streets, mixing with people, going out with girls and having those awkward...
And the answer is we're not doing it successfully at the moment because virgins under 30 is exploding, marriages is collapsing. We get the statistics through for marriages every year. Birth rates are
right
collapsing
across the Western world.
People are not getting together in the way that they did traditionally, and it's a problem. And it turns out, actually, when I was doing a wee bit of research in this, one of the best things you can do for your kids is get them into group sports.
Yeah.
So it turns out that people coming together with shared values in pursuit of a common goal, like winning a league or winning a fight or a training camp for something, is actually one of the most powerful ways that you can get your kids to reconnect with reality again, and all the good juju and the good feelings that they get out of that as well. I've actually seen it with my own son. My son started a Muay Thai class and he's so into it, and it's now the highlight of his week. Do you know what I mean? And so you see,
he's getting endorphins from it. He's getting his and it is, and I'm not being critical.
And he's connecting with the guys that are there, and he's in pursuit of this common goal, or training for a fight and all that kind of stuff.
But it's also, and again, we can go into much wider societal issues. No one teaches you to be a good parent.
Yeah.
And ultimately, being a good parent is giving your kids the balance, giving them all options. And I'm not saying I did this well either, but the reality is, if you just give your kid an iPad or a phone to keep them happy 95% of the time, if they get to eat their dinner in the room by themselves, what do you expect?
Yeah.
So it's kind of finding, how do you help? And that is that society's job. I mean, I never thought I would say this as I've got older, but maybe that's one of the problems with things like religion haven't actually become less common. You again, you have that value system, and what's going to replace that as good values in a modern world?
Loads of things, Stephen. It's the breakdown of the family. It's the breakdown of the idea of community. I mean, I just told you we came back from Ireland a couple of weeks ago. Like this sense of community in Ireland is palpable.
No, particularly in the country where Emma's family lives.
Doing it better than anybody else. The communities are real. Families stick together. No judgment. I come from, I've got an ex-wife. I've got a broken home, if you want to call it that, or a broken family, or what do they call
modern
it?
family.
A modern family.
Blended family.
Blended family. So no judgment. I'm in that camp myself, but it definitely becomes more difficult. Like when enough of that stuff happens, then things like community start to break down. When community starts to break down, standards start to slip. And when standards start to slip, you start to see all these deleterious.
And honestly, I totally agree with you. And this is not a kind of finger waving thing at anybody. I'm really talking here to myself. I think this is an opportunity for everybody to try and reconnect with their children again, because I think this concern is very real. I don't see it getting better. Actually, only in terms of what I'm observing in society, I only see it getting worse. And so I think there's never been more important time to reconnect with your kids and try and get them involved in these things to just kind of help steward them through this really challenging time
Here's
of
my
change.
recent experience though of AI. I can now tailor my podcast to things that interest me. I can get some information, stick it into
Notebook LM or whatever.
Notebook LM, and listen to stuff that interests me. I'm reading a lot more than I've ever read because I'm going on and I'm finding things to read. We find things to talk about in AI all the time. So there's lots of it's not this AI that's the problem. Even for myself, I go to bed at night and I watch television. I used to read a book, and I need to really go back to reading a book. So I think there's this kind of spiral. You're either spiraling up or you're spiraling down. And I think you hit a really good point. Maybe we need to stop the downward spiral and try to find a way, slowly, spiral.
And we're no experts on this, but if you want to talk to somebody who is, go and seek out Professor Scott Galloway.
Yes.
And watch his thing, in particular on young men.
Yeah.
Fascinating viewpoint on that. And
quite a dark statistic to share with you, by the way, which I checked before I came out.
Yeah.
Suicides in England and Wales last year were at a 26-year high.
Good night.
Good night.
Sorry.
But
I don't
also,
mean to make a joke
we know
about
it's
suicide,
the
but
biggest
it's
killer
terrible.
of young men.
Yeah.
And Scott Galloway, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on.
Yeah, come on the pod, Prof G.
And by the way, Prof G's not just about, mentoring your own kids. He's got a big thing about actually just find a young guy in your community you can mentor even if you don't have kids. And there's a lot of taboo and a lot of fear associated with that because, with
Professor
society.
Scott Galloway has a prescription for this, in particular for young men. I don't know what the version of this is for young women, but if you've got young male children and you're concerned about them, top tip on the podcast, go and hunt down Prof G and Stephen Bartlett's conversation about young men and the prescription for young men, and I found it to be extremely compelling.
Yeah. So that's that. That's been on my heart recently, and the last thing that I wanted to revisit was just the whole topic of jobs again. So again, I've been thinking a lot about this, a lot of disruption coming down the line. I don't think it's overly helpful to go way back to revolutions from 100 years ago and stuff, because some things are just so far away where they become kind of irrelevant. But one of the things...
You're talking about me again.
But one of the things that I wanted to touch on was maybe one of the last revolutions was when factory workers were displaced by technology and machinery and stuff like that. Now, the mantra back in those days was retrain, become a coder, right? And that was actually, there was a lot of sense to that at the time, and there was a lot of governmental support at the time, and it was a unique moment in time because there was adjacent industries that you could actually segue into. So if you were a manual worker in a factory following a process, using that same process-driven mechanism, you could take that into the adjacent industries of customer service, of, sales and business administration and these administrative processes. And there was a lot of support. There was a lot of support and help from the government to transition you in there, a lot of money put into training, a lot of money put behind the whole transition process. I don't think that works particularly well today. I don't think you can just say to everybody, go and train, because AI has got knowledge workers firmly in its sights at the moment. And so the answer would be train for what? So if you're in customer service, if you're in business administration, if you're in marketing, and somebody says, right, your job's going to be obsolete in 12 months' time, go and retrain. Retrain for what? Right? Because in this age of, we've got self-driving cars, we've got agentic capabilities exploding at a rate that even guys that are full-time at it like us can barely keep up to date with. So I don't think it's fair to just turn around to hundreds of millions of people and just say, just go and retrain, right? Telling people to become a coder is like telling people, it's like telling candle makers to become candle makers after electricity was invented. Do you know what I mean? I think we're in a situation now where, they're even talking about things like UBI. They're talking about a potential future of paying people money to stay at home because it's not entirely clear what we're going to do with them.
I have to say, I tend to agree that there's a part of me that wants to go, no, this is going to be great and it's going to be a world of abundance and it's going to be endless possibility and no disease and endless GDP. And I think there's a version of that far out into the future, but I think there's mind-blowing job displacement that shows up on the way. And so again, we've talked about it before, but the transition from the agricultural age to the industrial revolution led to an explosion in GDP. But if you were the fucking weavers who had to live through it for 60 or 70 years, it was grinding poverty for that class of people. So in 50 years' time, 20 years' time, is there explosion in GBT, robots, the combination of AI, robots and agentic workloads have exploded GDP and our capacity to get things done and make things. Sure, I think all that stuff could be true, but if we have to, what this looks like in the next 5 or 10 years navigating the transition, like there's a lot of people that tell you this won't displace jobs, it'll just create new ones, but they can't actually explain
how that will happen
and what the new jobs will be. It's almost like they hope that's what's going to happen rather than that there's some rationale for it.
So 2 or 3 things come to my mind. So one, I think, look around to see where there is requirements for labour at the moment. What's going to take a while to replace? So, for example, we have a chronic shortage of care workers. Yeah. So, if I was going to retrain today, I'd possibly...
It's the muscular class.
It's the muscular class. And there'll be things that you would like to do, and these jobs are underpaid at the moment. So, I would be looking for things which are slow to be disrupted and where a human interaction, human values. Secondly, we kind of touch on the point that actually what we have a problem with is not creating wealth, because that's going to be created. It's the distribution of wealth. Yeah. And that's where UBI, Universal Basic Income, becomes important. So you should be paid for doing nothing. Yeah.
But where does the tax base come from to pay millions of people UBI?
Because you've
if you've got millions of people out of work, right?
You've increased profits, and I hate to say this, ultimately that's going to have to be a redistribution from those that are making excess of profit. So whether that's a higher tax regime, but ultimately there has to be a different way. Other than that, you go back to the Industrial Revolution and the money going to the mill owners and everyone else living in destitution. Yeah. And that's the problem.
I think it's actually... I've got an anecdotal example for you, right? So Johnny Ive, who was the designer of the iPod and the iPhone and MacBook and all that stuff. Iconic, kind of Steve Jobs' right-hand man. He's the guy that used to introduce the new iPad, You go, it is 12% thinner, but 14% more delightful. He's one of these,
and he's going to sit up to
crazy sexy voice, Paddy.
Seductive. So Johnny Ive's company, I think it was called IO, just got acquired. And you're talking about a couple of dozen people who were basically all ex-Apple design refugees. Sam Altman will tell you, Johnny's put the best design team together that's ever existed in the world. They couple of dozen people just got acquired for $6.5 billion, right?
Are we going to guess what we're going to build?
If we start to see companies with 10 people in them valued and sold at $1 billion, 25 people in them turning over $600 million, well, historically, with traditional businesses without AI in the mix, it would have taken many thousands of people
to support
to
that.
generate that kind of revenue. And that's thousands of people working, thousands of people paying tax. So to Andy's point, if somebody's predicted the first $1 billion company with 2 employees,
Yeah.
like if that becomes even remotely, I wouldn't say commonplace, because $1 billion companies don't become commonplace, but if that's no longer an exception, and in parts of the world like Silicon Valley, there's hundreds of companies like that, and they companies would, in the historical model, would have hired hundreds and hundreds of thousands of employees.
So you have to look at changing the tax situation. The third thing I was going to mention though was think about new frontiers. So think about the creation of America. How was America founded by the West? It was through poverty, it was through religious persecution, through political persecution, and it became so miserable that people moved somewhere else to create a better life. And again, I think we're seeing some of that already in the West for people, immigration moving. Yeah. And I wonder if we're going to start seeing people moving because they need to move to places where the jobs environment, for whatever reason, is more conducive. And dare I say, not to go into my piece too early, will we eventually move off planet? Because that's where the opportunities will lie.
I would really implore young people and parents to just take a deep breath and pause before you, in a very automaton way, just go into what you would consider as a traditional career path,
Yeah.
I think you have to think now about what are the industries that are scaling in parallel with the proliferation of AI. So let's look at things
whatever
like...
you go and study today, you start day one at college in September or university. By the time you graduate for your degree, the world will not look the same. It will look completely different in 4 years' time in ways that's very difficult to predict at this point.
Right? If your daughter came into you and said, Dad, I'm going to university to become an accountant. 10 years ago, you would have been like, amazing, fantastic middle-class career path out of that. I'm not sure you could confidently say that anymore. And I'm only using that as an example, right? If they said, I'm doing business administration or any of these things that you thought could have really...
Funnily enough, America has got a mass shortage of CPAs at the moment, and they're going to need AI to plug the gap.
Yeah.
Scotland has a mass shortage, not a mass shortage of, but a shortage of solicitors coming through who want to own and run businesses. So there may be a less entrepreneurial class. So it is changing, but it's going to be interesting to see where AI fits into
let's
that.
look at some of the industries that are scaling in parallel with AI. So the obvious one is power generation, right? We need terawatts upon terawatts of new power generation to support this. So what are the jobs that supports? Engineering jobs, craft apprenticeships for maintaining...
Scaffolding. Shout out, brother Richard.
Yeah. Scaffolders.
Learning how to be really, really fast on a Peloton bike.
Yep. You'll need engineers that can maybe work in nuclear sites or work in small, SMRs, and guys to maintain the overhead lines, craft apprenticeships.
All captured in the muscular class. So when we say the muscular class...
Skilled labour.
Yeah.
So it's
skilled
hysterical,
physical labour.
Skilled physical labour in a world of AI, that's actually going to be one of the legs up that you can get on it, the most valuable.
Yeah.
And the corresponding construction boom, right? All of these data centres need to be built and all the apparatus run about them. So you're going to need endless amounts of joiners and plumbers and electricians and ground workers and bricklayers and so on and so forth. So you're absolutely right. I think such an unlock, particularly as when you're talking about young guys at this point, is skilled manual labour could be the game to get into.
Shout out nephew Luke, the future robber baron.
By the way, healthcare workers. We're still going to need doctors, nurses, care workers, consultants, and the big one, which again gets back to my Black Mirror episode 18 of the Black Mirror series, is mental health professionals. Yeah, we're going to need counsellors, therapists, career coaches. There's going to be, I don't think you could satiate the demand for that I don't think there's any amount of people you could stand up that could satiate the requirement for mental health services at the moment.
Agreed. There'll be an explosion. There already is an explosion in the need for that, and there will be further explosion in the need for that, sadly.
So I think what I really want to end with saying is there's definitely concerns around about jobs, but as we just highlighted there is gigantic industries and careers that are developing that you can if you just stop and think about your own career for a wee second, with you or your parent or your career advisor, don't just blindly go into something that's about to be absolutely annihilated by AI. Think a wee bit more strategically if you can. And there are fantastic careers out for you that can get you that brilliant professional standard of living that you're looking for. But it might be thinking a wee bit differently for the kind of traditional career path.
And while it's not 100% relevant, I think when we talk about entrepreneurialism, nothing's easy. You know, it's like there is no easy path.
100%.
No one's ever had an easy path. Realise that whatever you do in life, there will be challenges, but they always lead you to a
When
better
AI
place.
helps you come up with your great new business idea, guess what? You still have to go and convince somebody to part with some money for that thing.
Yeah.
And you still have to execute.
Freaking hard.
And you still
always
have
has
to
been.
execute on the idea, which is the hardest bit.
Yeah.
Episode 18 of The Black Mirror. Over.
All right, we're 40 minutes in.
Come on.
Stephen, you're next up.
So, again, it kind of touches a little bit on what Andy was talking about earlier on, but I was looking at the news this week and I saw something that kind of struck a chord with me, which was the 450th landing of a Falcon 6 rocket booster.
Falcon 9.
Falcon 9, sorry, rocket booster. And it was that moment where you kind of stop and went, this has become so commonplace that it hardly even hits the headlines.
It's the 747 going over the Atlantic now, do you know what I mean?
When I was a kid, I can't tell you how excited I was about the Apollo space mission. So it got me kind of thinking about
Stephen once again revealing what an old bastard he is.
Absolutely. But also I thought there's a really interesting story about, and some of the things we've touched on, but I wanted to do just a quick resume of Apollo to here and what we learned. Because actually, if you think back to the Apollo, the space missions, that was the Cold War. That was Russia versus the USA.
Correct.
And actually, we talk a lot in the pod about the AI war, China versus the USA. And there are one or two parallels I'd like to kind of draw from all that. So let's take a little journey back in time to when I was just a boy. And if you think back to the original Apollo mission, what pushed that forward? I mean, Apollo mission was the biggest group endeavor, peacetime group endeavor ever. It was in modern money about £250 billion.
Yeah.
250 billion pounds. At one point, it was up to almost 5% of US GDP.
Yeah.
And what drove it? It was a nation upon nation desire to win.
Yeah.
So Russia came along, both of them largely off the back of the Second World War, German expertise, both of whom had been taken away and kind of siloed in Russia and America, developing these rockets. And the Russians were pretty good at it. The Russians actually were the first, Yuri Gagarin, into space and took a real lead. And America was scared that it would lose that race for a couple of reasons. Obviously, national pride and intercontinental ballistic missiles. There was a military scenario, not dissimilar to where we are today.
Yeah.
So it turned its might towards it and focused on that. And actually, one of the lessons I think we learned was, if you look back now, so many of the investments were badly made. Had we simply thought about what the problem was, we want to get to the moon, we want to inhabit other parts of the solar system, we wouldn't have raced to the moon. We would have raced to low orbit, we'd have created a space station, we'd have used that as a launch pad, we'd have a much more sustainable system today. But that wasn't what drove it. It was competition.
We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
So we ended up with the Apollo missions, and it was quite interesting looking at the cost of launch. The next thing that obviously came along was the space shuttle.
Yeah.
So cost of launch, cost of delivering a kilogram to low space orbit is the kind of the metric. It's the currency of which. And actually, the space shuttle was Nixon. I think it was about 50 billion, so relatively cheap in comparison to Apollo, but flawed. It was meant to be reusable, and it wasn't. It was basically a couple of boosters. They would fall into the sea.
It was a terrible design.
Poor
Terrible
design, overly complex.
Wings.
The idea was right. The execution was wrong.
Yeah.
And we ended up with something which didn't have a great safety record, tragic loss of life. And actually, the cost of delivery to low space orbit was just under $20,000 per kilogram. Apollo was actually about $5,500 per kilogram.
Wow.
But it was a bit like saying, it was only £5,500 to fly this jumbo jet across the Atlantic. When I'm finished,
We'll scrap it.
We'll scrap the
Scrap it
jumbo
and
jet.
build another one.
So
to go
actually,
back.
Yeah.
the parallels are not really relevant.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we saw the arrival of SpaceX and make mistakes, learn, iterate. And we've talked about this in previous pods. Falcon 9 is down to about 2,600, so that's 10x reduction in price. We're looking at SpaceX Heavy.
$2,600
per kilogram.
per kilogram, right? Okay.
SpaceX Falcon Heavy down to about 1,500. And when we're looking at Starship, we're looking at coming down below $1,000.
Yeah.
I would say we love Elon when he comes to some of his science things. Until we kind of get there, it's going to be interesting to kind of see whether
But the most important question is, how many billions would it cost to blast the three of us into space at that?
Well, I'll come on to that in a second because I think it's really interesting, the cost. So, what SpaceX did really well was it took the bit that could be easily reused. So if you think about what happens with the Falcons, we're losing part of the spaceship.
Yeah.
It's the boosters that we reuse, the expensive bits. We land them, and we're down to, I think, some of them are now getting into 20, 25, 28, I think is the biggest number of
Relaunches.
Relaunches.
Yeah.
And down to, I think the rush went through in about 10 to 12 days.
Yeah.
They'll never get it down much below that because there's just too many things to check. But SpaceX works like a bus garage. We've got a fleet of buses. If that one's getting cleaned, we've got a bunch of other buses that will go out
Because
today.
they've launched multiple rockets on the same day.
Yeah.
And
So
landed them.
the fleet's getting bigger. We're getting new routes.
Yeah.
We're going to get more things on the routes, and the price just comes down and down and down.
But that is the workhorse until they can get to the Starship architecture, which is completely reusable. Is that right?
The Starship is both parts are reusable. It doesn't land together. It lands in two separate parts. Still new technology, but it is certainly, if we look at the iterations.
That's the holy grail, isn't it? If they can crack
Falcon
that.
Full
Right.
reusability
Full
collapses the cost
Yeah.
of
So,
space travel.
down to this.
Yeah.
And actually what's quite interesting, I was trying to work out what's the cost of delivering a parcel on Earth. And I think we're still talking about
Royal Mail First Class.
special delivery, like at the top end, you're not even £1 per kilogram. But let's say it was £1. Would I give up delivering anything for the rest of my life and save 1,000 deliveries to get 1 kilogram of me into space when I die? But what's interesting is the vector is collapsing. The cost of delivering on Earth is static now. It's not really changing. Drones might bring it down slightly.
And that means that you can do infinitely more in space by way of,
And that's what's becoming really interesting because the things, and we've talked about these in the pod before, we've got, because the cost is coming down, we've got new propulsion technologies. So next year, we're looking at Blue Origin and one of the big American giants, I can't remember the name at the moment, are talking.
Is it United Alliance?
No, I'll come back to you in a second. Are looking at launching, testing out their first nuclear propulsion.
Ooh.
We have got, it's Lockheed Martin and Blue Origin. DARPA, Blue Origin, and Lockheed Martin are the ones that are looking at nuclear. We are looking at also, there's another type of propulsion. It completely escapes me. Not ion, but there's other propulsion systems.
Other propulsion system.
All of these are about getting from here to somewhere else much quicker. So going from months to get to Mars to weeks to go to Mars. Again, it changes the dynamics. We've talked in previous pods about things like refueling. So again, we're pretty close now to creating our own fuels in space, actually growing our own fuels in space. So all that cost, we're looking at private creation of new space stations. So we're also looking at the International Space Station.
Because that's ready to get it's been ready for decommissioning for a while now, isn't it? Yeah.
So
you just need the Dr. Evil freaking space lasers from Austin Powers. We've probably got them actually in production at the moment. We just don't know.
I suspect they sit somewhere. But basically what we're seeing is that there is a constant creation of cheap stuff going to space. And then you say, well, is SpaceX the only option? And actually, it isn't. There's actually a really interesting race at the moment. So take, for example, India. India's got the most fascinating space program. And I love this idea they do things on a shoestring. They got to Mars for $74 million. Mm-hmm. Now, that sounds like a lot. That's not a, I mean, they landed something on Mars for $74 million. That's like a teaspoon.
Yeah.
So the ability for others to, there's a constraint, and we've talked about this before, find a constraint and see how that constraint boosts innovation, productivity. So you've got India coming along. You've got the Russians. Guess what?
They're the OGs of space rocket launches.
They've got...
Still sending the Soyuz up.
Soyuz up. It's like my old Volkswagen Golf. It's done 1,000,000 miles.
Never breaks down.
It never breaks down. Does exactly what it says in its tin. It's safe. It's reliable. And I think their cost still sits about $5,000 per kilo. So expensive. But if I was going to go into space tomorrow, I think I'd like to sit in a Soyuz. It's almost certainly one of the safest. SpaceX hits amazing numbers. I mean, the Falcon 9s are well into the 90%
of all payload.
And the Dragon capsule, let's be honest, looks way more luxurious and comfortable than the Soyuz.
Than the Soyuz, yeah.
It's got adaptive cruise.
Yeah. The Soyuz looks like the bunker Saddam had in before he was captured.
But you've still got Soyuz out there doing what it needs to do.
Yeah. The Chinese.
You have a British... Britain was actually... We talked about the Scottish space industry last week. Britain was at one point the third nation in space. I mean, it was behind Russia and America, and we still have limited
But we don't launch for here, do we?
We don't, but there's currently plans to launch from the Shetlands, and I was looking into this a wee bit. Apparently, a couple of the orbits, or some of the orbits, are easier to hit from here than it is from other parts of the world.
Calling bullshit on that if I know anything about the government in the UK. That'll happen in 2065.
We've got companies like Orbex, Skyora. We're looking at launching from UK soil in the foreseeable future.
But none of this commentary should really hide the fact that SpaceX
does 90% of all payload to orbit.
I don't think it can be overstated how big their lead is right now. And I know other guys are coming on, but SpaceX aren't resting on the laurels either. No. So honestly, like, I see a future where SpaceX is the most valuable company in the entire world.
Yeah.
Because the
Starlink system's already doing about $12 billion in revenue a year.
Yeah. There's them, and then everybody else combined is just a fraction of the overall volume.
I don't disagree, but I think it would be foolish to think they're the only game in town. And I think that we look back at, I remember days when Apple were the biggest company in the world, and then they disappeared, and then Jobs came back, and then the Microsoft... NVIDIA. There's no one stays at the top forever.
Except Elon.
Yeah, I think there's always things. So let's take that. So we've seen how we had national interest driving forward competition, and then eventually we've got to a place where space has become quite cooperative. The International Space Station, 16, I think, countries involved. Very much a joint effort. And even during the terrible conflicts in Russia and Ukraine, Russia still supporting it.
Cooperating.
Middle of the Cold War, we had that fabulous, don't you remember, détente? We had the handshake across the Soyuz and the Apollo. So space has always been seen as a place where we get together, the sharing of scientific data with the telescopes, analysing. Space has seen to be very collaborative, and we're moving more towards that as we're worrying about things like space debris, etc. Now we look at AI. And again, just very quickly, what we're seeing is it is a technology driven by economics and military. Mm-hmm. That's the two main things that we're all worried about. And we're seeing it as
it's a race for supremacy, right? We think whoever captures AI captures all the economic value in the future.
In the same way
military value, economic value, in the same way that we thought that would be the outcome of the space race. And so...
One big difference, it's not driven by a single government. In fact, governments are probably at the moment the smaller part.
Yes.
So actually what we're seeing is a lot of privately.
Private industry, yeah.
Yeah. And the difficulty is a bit like Betamax and VHS back in the good old days.
Yeah.
We're seeing this race to get not a unified system, but a race for our system to be better. So we've seen the attempt to strangle the Chinese AI industry. We've seen recently Trump's attempt to bring on board much of the Middle East to the American way of doing things to get this mass, and that mass will bring adoption, and that adoption will bring supremacy.
Betamax was for plebs, by the way. Betamax was the deep seeker fucking video players.
I still remember it had some better features, but the reality of it is it's adoption that will win the race. And like the space race, it doesn't bring about best option or best use of resources. It just brings about a winner mentality.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think concerns me. And then secondly, I suppose you have this idea that there is no collaboration and therefore there is no oversight. So we have all the worries that there is no common policy in AI. Almost no one has a proper AI. I mean, governments have AI strategies, but this idea of no working together to throttle down the negative
Nobody can
sides.
slow down. The race is so fucking
there's no-
frenetic.
The afterburners are on full send. There is nobody can slow this trend down. It's moving too quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, you know, when are we left with the Cold War scenario where it's just a race to a prize and damn the consequences? And that's the bit that worries me. Like, there's lots of positive things about AI. You've heard me talk about that.
Yeah.
But there is some negative sides that could flare up. And do we address those now, or do we only address those once we have a winner and then we start to deal retrospectively
with the
problems
consequences,
being
yeah.
created?
I was away seeing the latest Mission Impossible movie, The Last Reckoning, the other day, and that's basically the plot of it. And the answer is we deal with it after the shit hits the fan.
Ultron disappears into the internet and sets off every nook in the world.
Exactly. Pretty much. Okay.
A bit of a wander down memory lane and a bit of a
Brilliant.
thought about what the future might hold.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll bring us home with a very brief, and I'll keep this to probably 5-10 minutes max because we're at the 55-minute mark now. So
That's all right.
try
We've
and keep
done
it under
hour
an
and 10, 15-minute shows before.
So, God, a week's a long time in AI. So last week we were all fired up about Codex 1 and OpenAI's coding models, and then there's been a blizzard of AI breakthroughs and news and new capabilities since last Monday. So for anybody who doesn't know, in May every year, Google have their I.O. conference. This is not a new thing. They've been doing this for about a decade. And it's where they unveil all their latest, greatest new products and technologies and innovations. And it's like the Super Bowl for AI nerds. And I'm shaking my excitement, waiting for it to happen 2 days before it. And I was not disappointed. It was a mind-blowing 2-hour, tour de force unveiling of one new product after another, after another, after another. And so I'm going to run through what some of the things are and then talk about some of the insights I think I've managed to draw from that. So they started by talking about Gemini 2.5 Pro, which only came out recently. People think that's been out for a while. It's only a recent thing, which dominates all the LM arena categories, including things like hard prompts, coding, math, creative writing, instruction following, and longer queries. So it sweeps the board on the most meaningful benchmarks. Now, we know benchmarks are only one measure of capability, but right now, on a benchmark point of view, 2.5 Pro dominates everything, which means it's still the best general purpose model. If you can only afford one AI subscription, then just go and get Gemini.
Yeah.
Because across the board, it's still the best generalized model that there is. Then we were looking at the infrastructure advantage that they discussed during the conference. So in terms of model speed, how quickly the tokens come back, Gemini 2.45 holds the top 3 spots in output tokens per second.
Yeah.
So double the output tokens per second that 4.0 can generate. So right now, 2.5 averages about 313 tokens a second. So think about that as puking back something like 250 words a second versus 4.0 maybe generating 125. So the speed in which that response come back. And every time you hear tokens, just think words coming back from the LLM.
Am I right in saying in terms of cost per tokens, they were up there with best of breed as well?
They are the lowest cost per token of all the main model makers.
They were like matching DeepSeek and stuff like that.
100%. And they're on this crazy curve that nobody else is on, where the capability is exploding and the cost is collapsing.
With the Ironwood TPUs and stuff like that.
Whereas, and I'll get to this in a while, Claude 4 came out the other day, and it's undoubtedly a new state of the art for code generation, but the tokens are unbelievably expensive. Like almost unusably expensive.
When you're talking about token production, we're getting to the stage then where words are coming out faster than you can read them.
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And so if you think about how a Google search used to work, right? You type something in, you got a response instantly. Well, don't forget, tokens work left to right. Everything you see today is still next token prediction. So it's just the next word or the next letter coming out, and that goes left to right. And so you have to go as left to right as fast as possible to get a full page of output, because we've trained people for the last 10 years that search is instant and nobody wants to wait 15 seconds.
But you also don't need to.
So that's why the speed is important. And then if you talk about voice API,
that's exactly
the tokens are being converted into audio. And if there's massive delay and latency there, it doesn't feel like a natural conversation. Yeah. So token speed is significant and is a relevant factor.
Yeah. And it's not just about your ability to read it again, it's about the ability to feed voice APIs with it as well.
Yeah, okay.
They did address something that I think even the guys on the All In podcast had taken, I think had picked up some false information about. So there was false information that OpenAI had somewhere between 6 and 800 million monthly active subscribers on ChatGPT, which I think is pretty much accurate. And then that Google only had 30 to 40 million Gemini users.
Which is bollocks.
And so they debunked that myth during the conference. So the Gemini app has 400 million monthly active users and is growing parabolic. Now, to put their growth into perspective, Google tracks the total amount of tokens being produced by Google services per month.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if you went back to April 24, Google was processing 9.7 trillion tokens per month. So outputting 9.7 trillion tokens based on whatever AI workloads they were standing over at that point. Fast forward 1 year, they're now producing 480 trillion tokens a month.
Right, but hang on.
50x.
It's a 50x.
50x.
But is that a wee bit of a fugazi number? Because some of that is the Google search AI result that's getting forced down your throat, whether you had the Gemini app or not, right? Some of that.
But it's legit. I mean, it's AI overviews. It is. You're getting the answer in search, albeit a couple of sentences or a paragraph, but I'm sure that's included in the numbers. But it's a massive explosion. And for me, it's not really about adoption. For me, the fact that they could scale that technically, they could scale a 50x increase in token output and do it very gracefully and very consistently, again, just underscores to me the unbelievable infrastructure advantage that they have that literally none of the other model providers can match at this point. Then they went into some big research projects they've got. Some of them I thought were really just demoware and didn't really have any practical application. There was a couple of others that I thought were kind of meaningful. So the first one they demoed was Google Beam. So Google Beam is, think about a video conference, right? You're in a big company. They've got a video conferencing room. You've got a screen in front of you. The person in that screen is 3D. Yeah. Not like a hologram, but there's depth to the image. So apparently there's 6 cameras on the Google Beam screen. It's taking pictures from all different angles, and then AI is turning that into a 3D output. It's very hard to do it justice when you're not actually experiencing it, but the people who have experienced it said it genuinely feels like sitting opposite that person in a room. There's a depth to their imagery. Now, I don't know what practical applications that, maybe big companies and boardrooms would deploy that technology. What I do know is some version of that will eventually trickle its way down to the consumer products like Google Meet and the other video conferencing platforms. So that was an example of where they're using AI to do 3D video generation. They have Project Astra, which is Gemini Live. So that's the equivalent of speak mode or live mode on Grok. So you can turn it on and just have a fluent back and forth conversation. It can be ambient. It can access your camera. It can access screen recordings. And it's basically ambient computing that can be there to have back and forth conversations with. And then one that Andy will be quite interested in, which is Project Mariner, which is their agentic AI. And so their ability to take over the browser and get what done. a couple of different things that they demoed during the conference. They demoed a capability called teach and repeat. So if you sent the browser off to do something, it never quite got it right, you can actually put teach and repeat mode on. You can show it the steps once and it'll remember that and then be able to not just do that task, but use it to do similar tasks like it.
Yeah.
So apparently the more you use teach and repeat, the more you can actually dial in these very specific use cases for these agentic workloads. Agent mode, available in the Gemini app. So Guy gave an example of find new apartments every week until a lease is up for me and 2 roommates. We each have a budget of $1,200 a month, but it's got to be within walking distance of a laundromat. So the app then went off, checked out all the websites.
Did it start crawling Zillow and all that kind
and then does it every day.
Yeah.
And keeps updating them every day about what's available and what price points.
as a background task until it gets to the...
So they gave that as an example of an agentic workload that you could just send off using the Gemini app as one of many, many things like that you will be able to do. Then we got to the video stuff. So this is where I thought things started to get really interesting. I almost started to see new businesses develop in front of my eyes. So Google have had this VO video model for the last 3 or 4 months.
This is
VO2.
fucking unbelievable, by the way.
And so this was the ability to create 8 to 10 second videos. The early versions of this were very ropey. So if you went back a year ago, there's a famous video where Will Smith is eating spaghetti and his face is all like
distorted.
The physics is garbage.
Yeah.
He looks like he's a melted candle. It's not a good representation. They've taken it from that point now to where the physics is just unbelievably accurate.
Yeah.
So the way that materials react, the way that light reacts, the way that form reacts, is really almost
And the examples
close to 100%.
the examples of VO3 have just basically completely taken over your X feed. Have you seen all the examples? You must see VO examples on your X feed. Yeah.
So they've taken that underlying capability now of VO3, been able to generate AI generated video, and they're actually starting to build like movie production tools for commercial operations. So they have a tool called Flow, and the first AI generated movie will be out on June 13th. It's called Ancestra. And so it's a short movie purely generated by AI, by a film team, only using prompts, no actors, and apparently it's pretty legit. They have a music production. And by the way, I can see a new business developing here. What if in 24 months' time, Google is the modern instantiation of Hollywood?
Yeah.
What if
it becomes the new
Google
HBO,
creates a digital
yeah,
Hollywood and creates $100 billion business?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, and we'll come
And
to
churns
this.
out a blockbuster movie every week.
There you go, or a TV series. And so in the back of my mind, I'm constantly going, fucking hell, how are Google going to replace this revenue they've got from search? And then all of a sudden in my peripheral vision, with the things they're starting to launch, I'm starting to see potentially significant, meaningful businesses be developed on the horizon. Another example of that, they launched a new service called Lyria 2, which generates high-fidelity music and professional-grade audio. So this ability where not only could you produce a hit video or a hit movie or TV show every
There's
week,
native audio that goes
maybe
along,
you
yeah,
could produce a hit song every week.
I was listening to, I think it was Lex Friedman had the creator of Ubisoft, with the computer game company. They built the Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
And this is all reminding me of that someone's eventually got all the basic physics, created a box, and then they just sell the box to everyone else. So whenever you want to do anything, that world already exists. All you have to do is go into Google, and the world is there. You just pay them to use their world.
And these world-class script writers will prompt these things into reality with these super vivid compositions as they would normally do before handing it to a CGI developer. But it will just birth into life in seconds or minutes or hours using VO.
100%. And don't forget, like in the early days of Pixar, there was tremendous amount of work involved in creating a CGI movie. It was almost
Story,
many times
yeah.
more expensive than creating a traditional movie. This would be the opposite.
Yeah.
The cost would collapse. So if it costs $100 million to make a hit movie with Tom Cruise in it, maybe only costs like $5 million to make the same movie in the future.
But you get $250 million worth of box office revenue for it just the same.
Exactly. So I'm starting to see businesses developing here in these AI capabilities. Another thing they showed off was AI mode in search. This one's fascinating to me. So this is effectively going to become the new default search experience for Google. Right now, if you're in the US only, it's a tab that you can switch to and you'll get this new search experience. So it's not available in the UK. So I worked around that by turning my VPN on, connecting to a US server, went back to Google, and bingo, I now have access to AI
FBI,
mode
if you're listening.
in search. So what did I notice? As a long-term Perplexity user, it looked almost identical to the results I get in Perplexity. I could not see, it wasn't clear to me at all how the way that revenue is captured today from search. So you search for something, you get 10 blue links back that take you to websites that might have the information you're looking for, and then you get paid, or Google gets paid if you click off to their links. I could not see the equivalent of that in the results that came back. It truly was a Perplexity type result where it kind of gave me the answer. And of course, one of the examples we looked for, Stephen, just as we were goofing here before the podcast started, was give me a recommendation for a divorce lawyer in Glasgow. And it did come back with a bunch of divorce lawyers, but no links through to the websites.
Yeah. We talked before about
where does revenue get generated there? How does attribution happen there? That's bizarre to me that could become the default experience for everybody.
It's going to be fascinating because, again, we talked about how AI is going to collapse job markets, but it's also disrupting tech markets. And I think we talked about this. I don't think Google's got an option. The pod talks about all the time. The model's dying, and maybe this is the best option. It's going to be what drives you or I towards any model to search on, and Google's got to have the most user-friendly. Build it for the users, or build it for the users, and the users will follow.
And there is an agentic element to this as well, and it struck me that Google's cost to serve one of these results versus pulling 10 links for the index and printing them on a page must be 100 times what it costs to produce a standard search result right now, because in some of the examples we were looking at, it had searched 56 websites and crawled these 42 other resources and came back with the information.
Whereas before it's just pulling cached pages.
Pulling cached pages for an index and feeding you links to go and click on. The effort and the energy is 100x what's required to produce a traditional. So I'm fascinated to see how they're going to navigate the, what is it they call it? The innovator's dilemma, the chasm.
It's the innovator's dilemma.
Yeah.
And because the AI, so ChatGPT will have something to say about that. They've got their own live search thing that they're now baking into the product. So they've got they all have to follow each other off the cliff. They need to invent a new business model because they've got no way of sustaining this traditional search business.
So they showed the agentic capabilities in search. So the examples they gave was find 2 affordable tickets for this Saturday's Reds game in the lower levels. What it did is it broke that down into 10 sub-searches. So it broke that down into 10 separate queries. It looked for tickets on 15 sites, including SeatGeek, StubHub, and MLB. And then it came back and said task complete, and then presented the user with 3 options at 3 different price points with detailed explanations of, and it grouped them by the way. It said, well, if you're focused on seat position, this is the best option at this price. If you're focused on lowest cost, this is the best option at this price.
Which is
and then
amazing.
It was one click through to the page to complete the purchase. Or you could just say, complete the purchase for me on option 3. So that was a really fascinating insight into what the future of search looks like. The first 3 scenarios they're going to throw that agentic capability at are going to be optimizing for event tickets, restaurant reservations, and appointment booking for local services. So that's the 3 services they're starting with, and they'll fan out from there. Gemini in Chrome is another interesting one. So as you're looking at a web page in Chrome, there will be a new Gemini button. It's coming out any day now. It will scan the web page. It will basically look at the web page, and you'll be able to ask questions about the web page or take actions against the web page. That will be launched in Chrome and therefore available to you as a tool that you can apply.
Am I right in saying that there's agentic capability with that as well?
Correct.
And that's very clever because straight away you've got an install base of hundreds of millions of people that you can activate and make sticky with the product.
Yeah. And then finally, just wrapping this up, the last thing was the new Android mixed reality platform. So I think we're all familiar with the concept of VR glasses. That was like a version of this. So Android mixed reality is it's actually a collaboration with Samsung, by the way. They've built this platform together. And so this is a platform that goes beyond screens. This is in a world where you either have glasses on, you have Gemini-powered AI glasses that have capabilities, And you guys have seen today my Meta Ray-Ban glasses,
Very
my
cool.
AI glasses that allow me to take pictures, videos, interact with Meta's AI all through voice prompts. Now, this one's fascinating to me because don't forget, Google's been making glasses for 10 years. Google Glass was...
Remember those dweeb fucking Gen 1 Google Glass things?
But you know what? All the technology and the assets they built up there have seen them well, and I've actually carried that forward into the products and services they're about to launch right now. So Google have been at this a long time. They're ready to productize it. There will be glasses and a headset available towards the end of the year. The demo was incredible. You're talking about, obviously, you know, the obvious things, right? Taking pictures, taking video. You're talking about live translation across different languages.
That was
So
really cool.
If you're English and you go to Spain, or if you're English and you go to Italy, then you get into a shop and the guy doesn't speak English, you can speak to him in English. He'll hear it from the speakers on your glasses in Italian, and then when he talks back to you, you'll hear it in English. Live, real-time translation powered by AI.
Café con leche, por favor.
Now, what really, really struck me about this whole idea of ambient computing is it's only possible when you have a product like Gemini, right? Because the interface for that is voice. Okay, so you need a really smart voice assistant that can hear you, that's consistent, that gets it right 99.9% of the time. It's almost like we couldn't have this. This product could not exist until we built Gemini. Gemini is the foundational capability that makes this a reality, because we've had a couple of goes at this right now, and we just never had these AI tools in order to power them. And that makes me super concerned about the future of Apple, because where is Apple in this whole thing?
You're missing in action.
Google unveiled 20 different
MIA.
AI products. You saw whole new business models emerge, and Apple's AI efforts to this point are dead on arrival.
They're not even talking about what's coming out.
They've got too many other problems to focus on with
Trump.
Trump, tariffs, production. Their eye is off the ball. And you might or might not remember back to episode 1. I think Google was one of my predictions for this year. So they've had a real knock
Every
on their
Google
share
service
price.
is now imbued and teeming with AI capabilities. They're launching brand new services every other day, it would appear. And then I logged onto iCloud on the web the other day to look at my mail, drive, and calendar, and it was the most backward, ancient, archaic experience I think I've ever seen. These guys are nowhere.
Asleep at the wheel.
And do you know what and you can barely get Siri to reliably come up with a song, right? And we've been doing that for 10 years, and it still screws it up most of the time, at least for me. So Siri's not the answer. So here's my prediction. Apple at some point this year has to pull the only thing that they've got to get them out of this, which is the Apple Golden Jaffe Joffa from Coming to America checkbook.
I'm not
Okay?
for sale. Oha, bring the royal checkbook. You don't have enough money to buy me. Nonsense.
Apple need to pull the checkbook out, and they need to buy either Anthropic and imbue Claude and make Claude basically the underpinnings for an AI offering, or they need to buy Perplexity.
Perplexity would be the one.
And so there's a crazy Uncle Paddy prediction between now and the end of the year. Apple have to get the checkbook and buy Perplexity or Claude, because they cannot make this work themselves internally. They don't seem to have the tech talent, the culture, or the ability to ship these products. And by the way, Gemini's getting so good, and the new version of Android coming out in the fall or the autumn looks so freaking good. For the first time ever, I'm about to introduce a shit ton of inconvenience into my life as a lifelong Mac user and actually switch platform. I'm going to go from iPhone to Gemini. Not because I want Android, I want Gemini as the primary interface to my phone.
Baked
What
in
I was going to
natively to
ask
all
you
your
was,
different...
I mean, obviously you pay for a lot of different services. Where does the price point come? I mean, is
18 quid a month.
Is all of this stuff available on the 180-month?
No, it's not.
Right.
Okay, so I'll tell you, because I've got it on the screen here. So when they were talking about these things, I went into my $20 a month subscription and went, well, where is it? I don't see it.
VO3's on, and
Wrong. VO3 is only available in Google AI Ultra, which is $249 a month. So what you get with a $19.99 a month version is you get the Gemini app with 2.5 Pro and VO2. You get Flow, the video creation tool, powered by VO2. You get Whisk, which is another tool powered by VO2. You get Notebook LM and a bunch of other stuff. There's a separate subscription called Google AI Ultra for $250 a month. That gets you 2.5 Pro with a new capability called Deep Think.
Yeah.
Which apparently produces incredible results. Just takes longer to get them back because it's a deep reasoning request. And then the video tools within that subscription are powered by VO3.
Yeah.
And Image Gen 4 for the image generation.
And that's the real shit. That's
and
the
that
stuff
makes perfect sense to me because I don't know how you could be producing the tokens required to produce 20, 30, 40, 60-second long videos is enormous. So there's no way you could deliver that inside a $20 a month subscription. So you're now seeing the subscription bifurcate into a pro subscription and an ultra subscription. And I think business, enterprise is going to go ultra to get these.
I'll probably migrate over for that £200 a month.
Yeah.
OpenAI subscription to Gemini.
Okay, that's everything I had on Google I/O.
Coming to you live.
And listen, Claude 4 launched this week. What is there to say? It's the new. It was briefly for a moment. It was Google 2.5 Pro. It was the state of the art for code generation. Having watched an hour and a half's worth of code generation videos today on Claude 4 and how that compares with other models, I've become reliably convinced that Claude 4 has now once again became the state of the art for code generation. So again, on a week-by-week basis, we're seeing 15, 20% improvements compounding per week.
Every week. Every week. The king is dead. Long live the king.
Yeah. Which brings me back to all of my concerns at the start of the show. Anyway, let us eat pizza until the dough is dribbling out our eyeballs.
And let's have a Nutella calzone after we've eaten the pizza in order to guarantee that maximum amount of saturated fat turns in.
And sugar.
Yeah.
The good news is I bought new anti-indigestion pills tonight.
Great.
So I can sleep easily tonight.
Let the pancreases explode out our stomachs as it tries to deal with the crazed amounts of carbs in Nutella.
Love it. All right. Well, there you go. Episode 18 in the can. We did it. All right, folks. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.